In Kenya, researchers watched an elephant named Eleanor collapse and die. Within hours, other elephants began arriving from miles away, not to feed, not to drink. They came to stand beside her body, touch her with their trunks, and stay. Scientists had no survival explanation for any of it. The observation was recorded by researchers at the Amboseli Elephant Research Project, one of the longest-running wildlife studies in the world. Eleanor was the matriarch of her family group, and when she died in 2003, something happened that didn't fit neatly into any existing behavioral category. A different elephant family, not even Eleanor's own, approached the body first. A female named Grace tried repeatedly to lift Eleanor back onto her feet, using her tusks and trunk, pushing against the dead weight of an animal far too heavy to move. When that failed, Grace stayed beside the body through the night. Over the following days, elephants from multiple unrelated family groups visited the site. They touched the body with their trunks. They stood near it in silence for extended periods. Some appeared to sniff and investigate the bones for months afterward, long after the body had been picked clean by scavengers. This wasn't an isolated incident. Researcher Cynthia Moss, who has studied Kenyan elephants for over 4 decades, documented dozens of similar cases. Elephants returning to the bones of dead family members years later. Elephants gently touching skulls and tusks with their trunks, in movements distinct from how they investigate ordinary objects. Elephants going quiet, moving slowly, sometimes standing motionless near a body for hours. None of this behavior provides any survival advantage. There is no food reward, no safety benefit. No clear evolutionary function researchers have been able to identify, and yet it happens consistently across elephant populations that have never had contact with each other. For decades, mainstream science treated this kind of behavior with deep suspicion. Attributing grief to animals was considered anthropomorphism, projecting human emotions onto creatures that almost certainly didn't experience anything resembling human loss. The scientific consensus held that animals reacted to death with confusion or curiosity at most, not sorrow. But the evidence kept accumulating, and elephants weren't the only ones doing this. In Washington state, researcher John Marsluff began documenting something unexpected in American crows. When a crow dies, nearby crows don't simply ignore the body and move on. They gather. Dozens of crows will sometimes congregate around a dead member of their species, calling loudly, circling the body, then falling into an unusual, prolonged silence. Marsluff's team began calling these gatherings crow funerals, a term initially meant somewhat informally that increasingly seemed to describe exactly what was happening. Researchers ran controlled experiments to understand the behavior better. They placed a taxidermied dead crow in a location and watched how live crows responded. The reaction was immediate and consistent. Crows would mob the area, call out warnings to other crows, and avoid that specific location for an extended period afterward. At first, this looked purely functional, a warning system. Crows learning that a location was dangerous because another crow had died there. But further observation revealed something stranger. Crows didn't just avoid the location. They appeared to specifically remember and avoid the individual human or predator associated with the death, sometimes for years, passing that information to crows that hadn't even been present for the original event. This wasn't simple danger avoidance. This was something closer to social memory of loss, transmitted across a community, outliving the individuals who witnessed it firsthand. But the most unsettling evidence came from somewhere much closer to us, genetically. At Jane Goodall's long-term research site in Gombe, Tanzania, researchers documented multiple instances of chimpanzee mothers carrying their dead infants, not for hours, for days. In some documented cases, for weeks. Mothers would groom the deceased infant's body as though it were still alive. They would carry it through the forest, sometimes for miles, refusing to abandon it even as the body began visibly decomposing. Primatologists have observed this behavior across multiple chimpanzee populations, independently, suggesting it isn't a single isolated quirk, but something closer to a shared behavioral pattern across the species. In one widely documented case, an entire chimpanzee group fell into what researchers described as a subdued, unusually quiet state after witnessing the sudden death of a high-ranking group member. Normal vocalizations dropped sharply. Feeding behavior changed. The group's overall activity level remained noticeably depressed for days afterward. Chimpanzees share more than 98% of their DNA with humans. When researchers see behavior this close to what humans would call mourning, in a species this closely related to our own, the old assumption that grief is a uniquely human invention becomes much harder to defend. So what is actually happening inside these animals? Neuroscientists studying grief in humans have identified specific brain regions involved in processing loss, including areas associated with memory, social bonding, and reward processing. When a close relationship ends through death, these systems don't simply switch off. They continue firing in patterns associated with seeking out the missing individual, even when the brain has accurate information that the search will fail. This creates a kind of neurological friction. The bonding system expects the relationship to continue. Reality contradicts it. The result, in humans, is what we call grief. Researchers increasingly suspect a similar mechanism may be at work in elephants, crows, and chimpanzees, species that all share something crucial in common with humans: long-term social bonds, extended memory, the capacity to recognize specific individuals across years, sometimes decades. Grief, under this theory, isn't a uniquely human emotion bolted onto an otherwise animal brain. It may be a natural and almost unavoidable consequence of any nervous system complex enough to form deep, individual attachments in the first place. If you are capable of loving someone specifically, as an individual, rather than simply tolerating their presence, you become biologically vulnerable to losing them specifically. Grief may simply be the cost of being capable of that kind of bond at all. This reframes something important about what grief actually is. It isn't a malfunction. It isn't sentimentality. It isn't a uniquely human weakness layered on top of more practical animal instincts. It may be one of the oldest, most widespread signs of a particular kind of intelligence. Not the intelligence of solving puzzles or using tools, but the intelligence of forming bonds specific enough and deep enough that their absence becomes something the brain cannot simply ignore. Every elephant standing silently over old bones. Every crow falling quiet around a fallen member of its flock. Every chimpanzee mother refusing to set down a body that will never move again. These aren't malfunctions in animal behavior. They might be evidence of exactly the same thing that happens inside you when someone you love is gone, and some part of your mind keeps expecting them to walk back through the door anyway. Researchers are still careful about how far to take these comparisons. Animal grief almost certainly doesn't carry the same complex, narrative self-awareness that human grief does. An elephant standing over bones is not composing memories the way a human mind constructs a eulogy, but the line between real grief and something that merely resembles grief keeps getting harder to draw with any confidence. And maybe that line was never as solid as we assumed. Eleanor died in 2003. The elephants who visited her bones kept returning for years afterward, long after there was anything left to investigate, anything left to learn, any rational reason at all to keep coming back. They came back anyway, which means somewhere out there, right now, an animal is standing quietly beside something it has already lost, for reasons that have nothing to do with survival and everything to do with the simple, costly fact that it once chose to care.